Of course, this is where Deadpool himself would start out with a fourth wall breaking, addressing the audience directly quip. But since that's pretty much all I do here, I think we might as well just get this show started.
Welcome to the Crooked Table Podcast, where we discuss the world of film from a fresh angle. And now your host, Robert Yaniz Jr.
Welcome to the Crooked Table Podcast. This is Rob. On this episode, it's another month and another Marvel movie, so we're talking all about Deadpool. Deadpool 2, more specifically. And I'm not going to do a traditional review like we normally do on this podcast. I'm going to have a written review going up on crookedtable.com, hopefully within 24 hours of this episode going live. But I will give you my quick thoughts of the film. Overall, I was a little hesitant going into it. I kind of had some concerns that it wasn't going to live up to the first Deadpool film from 2016 from director Tim Miller. Part of the reason was that Miller himself wasn't returning, although I do really like David Leitch, the director of, unofficially, uncredited director of the first John Wick, and he also did Atomic Blonde last year, which I enjoyed quite a bit. But more than that, the reports coming in that he left the project due to creative differences. He wanted to do a smaller, more focused film like the first one, whereas it seemed like Ryan Reynolds in the studio wanted to pump in, a bigger budget and go heavier on the CG and, more, a little grander in scope and that kind of thing. And I think it definitely shows that they went the latter route here. R-rated comic book films in general tend to not sustain themselves very well into sequels. I'm thinking specifically of Kick-Ass 2 and of Kingsman: The Golden Circle, both of which are preceded by excellent films that are probably among the best R-rated comic book films or comic book films in general of the last decade or so. I really enjoyed both Kingsman and Kick-Ass. The sequels had very much diminishing returns. Especially Kick-Ass 2, which I really only saw the one time and think is kind of terrible. Kingsman is fine, but it's not nearly as cohesive or the sequel's very spastic, and you can tell with both of those films that the directors and the studios and the teams behind them were trying to up the ante and continually outdo themselves as far as the violence, as far as the shock value, as far as pushing the envelope and just trying to create something that capitalizes on what worked the first time and just intensifies it to the nth degree. And I think Deadpool 2 definitely suffers from that. There's a lot of stuff in the film that does work. I think specifically, I think her name is Zazie Beetz playing Domino. She was great. She was actually the best part of the movie, I thought. Josh Brolin was fine as Cable. I actually thought he was better as Thanos. Just because I'm familiar with Cable, and this felt like I know he's supposed to be stoic, but he also felt kind of undeveloped until the third act, essentially. But that's part of the storyline. I actually thought Ryan Reynolds' Deadpool was kind of obnoxious and got on my nerves more than he did in the first one. I was totally on his side in the first film, and in this one, I felt like they crammed in so many references and so many jabs at Marvel or DC or comic movies in general, or hey, Green Lantern or X-Men Origins Wolverine or whatever, that it became sort of annoying after a while and almost predictable. That being said, in addition, there was a lot more extreme violence, and I don't think that necessarily having more violence in your superhero film, even if it's Deadpool, makes it a better story. And there were a lot of narrative shortcuts in here, especially with the way they handled the character of Vanessa, played by Marina Baccarin, and a lot of repetitive gags. I mean, you see that a lot with comedy sequels. I think always about the Austin Powers trilogy, which I love, but which very much feels like the first one feels like a breath of fresh air. The second one feels like it's rehashing jokes from the first one, and the third one feels like it's rehashing jokes from the first two. And I definitely feel like Deadpool 2 had a lot of that. I mean, you could go through and with a clipboard and be like, yep, that's the reference to the first one. That's another joke that's like a play on the first one. That literally constantly. And while I enjoyed the film, it's definitely a tremendous step down from the first one, in my opinion, as far as narratively, as far as how funny it was, and as far as how overall how successful it was as a movie. Will I get it and add it to my X-Men my Blu-ray X-Men Blu-ray collection. Of course, I have X-Men Origins Wolverine, which I'm not proud of, but I got it for like $4 on DVD, so it's like I'll give myself a pass. And this is definitely better than that. But to my estimation, it's definitely one of the weakest X-Men films of the 12 or 10 or whatever they're at now. I put it above X-Men Apocalypse, X-Men Last Stand, and X-Men Origins Wolverine, and that's about it. So, a lot of people are going into this super hyped, and obviously it made, $125 million this weekend, so clearly audiences are loving it, and I thought it was fine. I thought it was okay, which was a disappointment for me, considering how much I did enjoy the first one, which I know has its detractors too. So it's interesting to see, how it'll be interesting to see where they take this character now going forward. I think the next step is absolutely going to be an X-Force film. But I actually have had this theory for a while that Deadpool himself would actually be the perfect sort of launch pad for rebooting the X-Men franchise as a whole. And I actually wrote an article about this for cheatsheet.com last year, and I'll add that to the show notes below, for 10 reasons why Deadpool would be the perfect way to lean into redoing the entire X-Men universe. The fact that he breaks the fourth wall and that kind of thing. And I think it's time for that. At this point, it seems like Fox doesn't even really know what to do with the X-Men franchise. I mean, right now we have X-Men Dark Phoenix, which we got pushed back to next year, and then we have the New Mutants, which also got pushed back to next year. And I don't know if part of that has to do with the pending Fox Disney deal, or if part of that is just because the studio doesn't have faith in those properties at all right now, or I'm curious what the deal is with that. So I just wanted to run through my top 10 reasons why I think that regardless of what happens with Dark Phoenix and New Mutants, regardless of whether Marvel and or Disney ends up with the X-Men franchise down the line, I do think that if X-Men goes back to Disney or goes back to Marvel Studios and the Disney-owned side of things, I do think they're definitely going to reboot it, and I think that they should keep Deadpool and use him as a way of sort of leading into that. So let's just get started with it. Number 10, Deadpool, the original film, it already reboots Colossus and the X-Men. I mean, we have references to Patrick Stewart and McAvoy, and there's even a couple of really cool cameos in the films about referencing those characters and those portrayals, but they're really just asides. I heard on a podcast recently them comparing the Deadpool films to sort of Family Guy style, where there's a quick cutaway gag or constant pop culture references, that kind of thing. And the X-Men appearances thus far, with the exception of Colossus and Negasonic Teenage Warhead and such, have very much been asides, like, oh, what? Why is nobody here? McAvoy or Stewart, that kind of thing. There's no reason why that's canon. And plus, if anybody is equipped to look over those kinds of things, it's Deadpool. And Colossus is played by a different actor than he was in the Bryan Singer films, and we haven't really seen any of the other X-Men in a substantive role. There's another character that shows up in a Deadpool 2 that was in the X-Men films that is again portrayed differently than he was there. So I think that they haven't established necessarily that Hugh Jackman's Wolverine is in this world, or they sort of have, but in a jokey way, not really in a way that has any substance on the narrative. So I think that they sort of have already kind of backdoored their way into rebooting the X-Men already, starting with Colossus. Number 9, the time has come for a fresh approach. I think X-Men Apocalypse would have been the perfect way to end that part of the franchise. Of course, we're still getting Dark Phoenix at some point, but I think at this point, it's been 18 years actually, since the X-Men franchise started, and it's already been insanely convoluted, and fans have been sort of mixed on it, I think, not necessarily from the beginning, but certainly after the films started being not so great. So I guess with Last Stand and it's been kind of a roller coaster ride of a great X-Men film, a terrible X-Men film, a great X-Men film, a terrible X-Men film. And I think one of the best ways to move forward with that, especially considering that Deadpool lends itself to that, is to bring in a fresh approach. And the X-Men franchise has not been consistently thriving like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and it has not been sort of mired with trouble from the start like the DC Extended Universe or whatever we're calling that. But it's been very rocky, and I think that injecting some fresh blood in there is definitely the way to go. Number 8, Deadpool opens the doors to X-Force. Obviously, this article was written a year ago, and I still stand by everything it says, but this one is a little dated because it obviously does open the doors to X-Force. Not only is that implied because Deadpool, the first film mentioned that Cable would be a part of it, that Deadpool is part of X-Force in the comics, but this film literally has a sort of proto-version of X-Force and concludes in a way that obviously implies that, you almost expect at the end of the film, Deadpool will return in X-Force. They've been hedging their bets whether or not we're going to even get a Deadpool 3, and if we do, I think it would definitely be after X-Force, considering the way this ends and considering the reaction to this film. So X-Force would bring another team into it, which would mix things up, which would vary the brand and not necessarily hang everything on the Professor X, Magneto conflict, or Wolverine and that classic team that we've seen in previous films. And I think that could be part of the fresh approach that this franchise could take going forward. Number 7, a new opportunity to tie into Marvel Studios films. If they're going to do that, if Disney is going to purchase Fox and that all works out, keep Ryan Reynolds and build the rest of the franchise around him. Like I said, they have not introduced the other characters thus far, really, the other X-Men. So you can have Ryan Reynolds and Deadpool kind of be the entryway and say, hey, me, now I'm coming over here and I'm interacting with, the Marvel Cinematic Universe and the Avengers and all that. And there's lots of references to them in this film already. So it almost sort of feels like Deadpool 2 sort of kind of sneaks its way into the MCU just because he's making so many references, like he knows who these characters are, or like they exist in the same world. And I think, if they do bring the X-Men into the Avengers universe, which obviously will happen at some point, perhaps sooner than later, depending how the deal goes down, Deadpool already kind of gives you the way to do that. Number 6, freedom to reimagine iconic heroes and villains. Since the beginning, people have been bitching about, well, this character is not how they are in the comics, or this is not their origin there, or blah, 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 blah. This is the chance for Fox or Marvel or Disney, like I said, whoever's in charge of these characters ultimately, this gives them the chance to go back and do a version of the characters that is truer to what fans want, that it explores different aspects of fan favorite characters, like Cyclops, who was sort of sidelined in the Bryan Singer films, or like Storm, who they seem to have never really gotten right in these films. Not that Halle Berry's a great actress, but that character's portrayal has always been kind of evolving, but never really gelling with how Storm is depicted in the comics. She's never really 100% been the leader and been the character that fans have been behind from the beginning. Plus, if you bring them into the MCU, then you can have Storm interacting with Black Panther, and then we can play out some of that storyline a little bit. So there's a lot of opportunity here to reimagine these characters, and they did that to an extent in the prequel films, First Class onward. And I think this is an opportunity to wipe the board clean and get back to the drawing board, and really give the fans the versions of these characters that they want to see on screen, that they haven't seen before. Because X-Men, the original X-Men film, came out in 2000, which is a totally different landscape for superhero films, where everybody was in black leather because they thought the colorful costumes would look ridiculous. And now you have Thanos coming down from space, and everybody's in a costume, and everybody's using their fake names, as Spider-Man likes to say. So I think it would be interesting to see what those characters would look like interpreted now, as opposed to nearly 20 years ago, when comic book movies weren't nearly as mainstream and when they had to sort of fit into a box of what a Hollywood action movie is supposed to be. Number 5, Logan marks a solid conclusion to this era. Again, this is before we knew for sure we were getting X-Men Dark Phoenix, let alone New Mutants. Seems like it is kind of an anomaly because I don't think it really, from what I've heard, doesn't sound like it's going to involve characters that we've seen on the big screen before. So I think that one doesn't really count. But as far as X-Men Dark Phoenix, I guess that's an epilogue to this, the conclusion to this era. But I think that Logan would have been the perfect film to end the Hugh Jackman-led, Patrick Stewart, McAvoy, all that stuff, that era of this franchise, because they have played a lot of things out. He has essentially been the face of that franchise for so long, and it was a really powerful way to end Wolverine's storyline on, but also like that team and those X-Men, and sort of leave them behind. Obviously Patrick Stewart is in Logan, and his storyline comes to a conclusion as well. And if you would have ended it at Logan, you would have had a Wolverine trilogy, or the original X-Men trilogy with Cyclops, Storm, and all that, and then the prequel X-Men trilogy that basically leads into that X-Men team from the original trilogy. So I feel like you would have had a nice 9-film set of Wolverine, about Wolverine and Magneto and Professor X, Cyclops, Storm, Jean Grey, and then kind of let that be, and then okay, let's focus on either other heroes or new versions of those heroes or whatever. And Deadpool would have been a great way to kind of keep that moving forward, focusing on Deadpool and Cable and X-Force, and bringing other characters that we know in based on that, and using Deadpool and friends as the foundation. Possibly throwing in an X-23 movie because Daphne Keene's performance was so praised and she was amazing in that. But alas, we now have X-Men Dark Phoenix, which I think is one film too many from that subset of the franchise. But we'll see how it goes. Simon Kinberg's directorial debut. Hopefully, it will work and be an amazing movie and give us the Dark Phoenix film that we've always hoped for. But we'll see. I'm holding off getting excited about that just yet. Number 4, fans are over Bryan Singer's direction and style. Like I was saying, the black leather for the X-Men and the more Hollywoodized versions of these comic book icons. I think people, hardcore fans especially, have had enough of that take on it. And Bryan Singer's whole ethos for these characters has been like, well, what if being a mutant was like being a gay man, or being gay or whatever? And that has clearly been very resonant interpretation of the characters, and they've always been a metaphor for some marginalized group, whether it's a race or sexual orientation or gender or whatever. Those people that didn't feel like they didn't belong, and them trying to fit into society. And I think Bryan Singer's take on that was really strong to get things started, but after a while it does feel like he's sort of running out of ideas and kind of running in circles. I mean, if you see X-Men Apocalypse, it was clearly among the weakest of the franchise, in part because I think he sort of doesn't have much inspiration left for this world. I think that he's just basically linking things up to his original vision because he doesn't really, it's time for some new voices in here. And, I imagine like the growth that the MCU has seen because they brought in people like Ryan Coogler, people like James Gunn, people like Scott Derrickson, or people like the Russo brothers, who nobody even knew that they would be able to craft three of the best Marvel films to date. Of the 19, I consider there 3 to be in the top 5. So I think that it's time for Bryan Singer to say farewell to this franchise, which seems like it's already happening, and someone else to come in and, not necessarily have one director sort of lording over the whole thing. You could do like a Mission Impossible style. Every director comes in for each film and just kind of puts their own stamp on it, like they do for Bond. So we'll see. I mean, I think that there's a lot of opportunity for interesting filmmakers to come in and make the X-Men their own. Number 3, both the original and prequel trilogies are complete. Like I said, this is kind of treading familiar ground as to what I mentioned a moment ago. But the original trilogy with Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen and Hugh Jackman leading that that one ended on a somewhat note, and the prequel trilogy ended and hinted at connection to the original film. So there's not really much more you need to do with those characters. I mean, you could continue like they're doing with Dark Phoenix, but I do feel like, basically I love the idea of trilogies, a film or a narrative that builds over 3 films and comes to a climax, and then that's the end of that storyline. And then you do something else. And the fact that now we're getting a 4th in the prequel X-Men films feels like a bridge too far. You see this with the MCU. Part of the reason I feel like they've been able to sustain themselves for the last decade is that, there's been 19 films, but each character's little solo journey has concluded after 3 films. Where otherwise we'd be on Iron Man 6 by now. But the fact that there's only 3 Iron Mans, there's 3 Captain Americas, there's probably going to be just 3, Ant-Mans and Doctor Strange films, and they'll continue having the team-up films where those characters can keep showing up. But I think that it's time to start a new trilogy as opposed to continuing, treading the same water. And the fact that we're getting a Dark Phoenix film, and we already sort of had a Dark Phoenix film, sort of. It depends. Not really. If you ask people that know about the storyline, does not really have anything to do with the source material. But the Dark Phoenix film in name only. I think that it's time to do something new, and they had a perfect tying off point for the team-led franchise. Number 2, Ryan Reynolds makes a great franchise poster boy. Hugh Jackman's clearly done with this character. Maybe he'll pop up in a cameo down the line or whatever, but for the most part, I think we're done with Wolverine films. And as I said, with the character trilogies, I think he should be done. I think we've seen that character start his journey. We've seen that character kind of struggle with where he is, and then we've seen that character end his journey. And I think Hugh Jackman has been sort of beating the drum for this franchise for a long time, and he's super charismatic and super popular, and everybody loves him. And I think that could transition even easily over to Ryan Reynolds, because Ryan Reynolds is very passionate about this character. He's great on the talk show circuit. He's no problem putting on that red suit to show up on a late night talk show, or to show up in a commercial, or to just really play up the fact that he is Deadpool. That the actor himself is really owns that part, and in the way that Hugh Jackman owned Wolverine on the big screen. And I think he would be the perfect sort of person for other actors and for other filmmakers and stuff to rally around in the way that like Robert Downey Jr. has for the MCU. There's a bazillion characters, but Iron Man has always been the big audience draw in a lot of ways. He's always been, one of the most recognizable figures in that world, and he's also always been, the most happy to like, yeah, sure, I'll sign on for this movie. I'll make an appearance here. I'll do, whatever you need. He's seems very willing to be a part of perpetuating the brand, essentially. And I think Ryan Reynolds would be the ideal choice to keep the X-Men franchise moving in that same direction. So finally, number 1, there's no better film to serve as the series foundation. Deadpool came out and blew people's expectations away, became the highest grossing X-Men film, became one of the highest grossing R-rated films of all time. And that's a character that, yes, cosplayers knew, people that go to conventions knew, but general audiences had no idea who Deadpool was. They just heard about the buzz and went to check it out, and lo and behold, he became an icon on the big screen, just like he is on the page. And, if you're going to hang your future success on a film, why not have it be your biggest achievement? The film that sort of, in a way, broke boundaries by poking holes in the superhero genre as a whole, and doing something new with it, taking it for a spin, and a little bit of a joyride in a red and black suit. And Deadpool. My feelings about Deadpool 2 aside, Deadpool. The film and the character seems like the perfect way to do that. I mean, look at what Iron Man has done for the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The fact that he was also sort of a B-level superhero until Robert Downey Jr. came and made him a household name. And I think the same could be said for Ryan Reynolds and what Deadpool has achieved. So if you're going to build a franchise off of a film, it should be something like Deadpool, something like Iron Man. So I think that that's definitely what we're going to see in the coming years. It'll be interesting where the X-Men film rights end up, if Disney or Fox or whoever, if they decide to follow my advice, listen to this podcast, I guess, and have Deadpool kind of be the starting point for building out the rest of the X-Men universe, or if they let him be in his own little corner and do their own thing on the side. I think integrating PG-13 and R-rated releases would be a good way to go, because then you get audiences of all kind. You can have a PG-13 X-Men set in the same world as the R-rated Deadpool, and then have Deadpool comment on, man, I can't curse because I'm in a PG-13 movie or something when he does appear there. I think the Disney has gotten some flack from some fans because they're all sort of not the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I mean, they're good films overall, and some of them are great, but there is this sort of homogenization that's happened there. The fact that they all are very PG-13 and very family friendly, and clearly playing for the most part to kids and of all ages, basically. And I think that one way the X-Men universe can kind of distinguish itself is to have R-rated films mixed in with PG-13 films, and have that variety to keep the franchise growing and alive, especially since you're going to have to overcome the fact that there is 17 or 18 years, I keep forgetting that, 18 years of history that audiences will have to move past to accept a new vision. So that's just my thoughts for how I think Deadpool would fit in with the X-Men universe, depending what they end up doing with it. As a fan, I'm definitely interested to see how that turns out. But that's all I have for now. If you like what we're doing here, please consider contributing to our Patreon page, just launched at patreon.com/crookedtable. You can also rate and review the Crooked Table podcast on iTunes to help others find the show. You can find me, Robert Yaniz Jr., on Twitter at Crooked Table. Of course, there's more podcasts, reviews, videos, and other movie-related goodies over at crookedtable.com. Next episode is obviously going to have to do something with Solo, whether that'll be a review or another more speculative piece like this episode. Remains to be seen. I have to sort of figure out, I guess, what direction I want to take that episode in. Until then, I've been Rob. We'll catch you around the table next week. Roll credits.
This has been a production of crookedtable.com. All rights reserved.
CROOKED.